Caleb and NVG asked me to speak today about the future of Napa Valley. I don't have a crystal ball, but I do know this. We live in a remarkable place with a unique history and a rich culture that has allowed us to achieve so much in really so short a time, and it truly is a short time. 100 years ago, Napa Valley was gripped with prohibition. 50 years ago, our wines astonished the world at the Judgment of Paris. And today we're making some of our finest, most expressive, site-driven wines in our entire history. When I look ahead, what stands out most is the sense of continuity, how each generation inherits not just the land, but the values, the vision, and the responsibilities that come with it. This valley's greatness has never been an accident. It's a result of foresight, collaboration, and a shared belief that agriculture and community can thrive together, that the land itself is both our livelihood and our legacy. Today, I want to talk about how we can extend that legacy into the next generation, how we can balance growth with preservation, safeguard the integrity of our vineyards and landscapes, and ensure that Napa Valley remains a model of stewardship for the world. Before we talk about solutions, we have to remember what makes Napa Valley unique, a place where people and the land have shaped one another for generations. That shared history helps us understand the current pressures and chart a wise path forward. And that sets the stage for what I want to talk about, how we preserve what defines us while adapting to new realities, and how thoughtful planning can carry our values forward. So today is not a conversation about limits, it's a conversation about possibilities. Napa Valley has always evolved without losing sight of what makes it special, and I believe we can do it again. First, let me tell you a little bit about my background. I was raised in the South, the deep South, not Southern California, in a family that drank cocktails, not wine. I fell in love with wine as a graduate student at Oxford, which led to a year working at a winery in Burgundy. I returned to the States, curious about Napa Valley because the Judgment of Paris had happened while I was living in England. I first visited Napa Valley in 1979, worked here during law school, and moved here permanently in 1986. In all that time, I've never seen the wine market as challenging as it is today. We're facing climate pressures, shifting consumer demographics, competition from cocktails, ready-to-drink beverages, and cannabis, and a renewed focus on health and moderation, even abstention, all in an economy marked by high interest rates and lagging demand. And all of this is happening alongside pressures on housing and rising costs for everyone. That's a daunting list. And there's another reality that we can't ignore. Over the past year, more than 3,000 acres of vineyards have been pulled out, and even more fruit has gone unpicked. And there's also red blotch. It's a painful moment for growers and vintners alike, but our wine economy will recover. It may take a couple of years, but we have deep strengths in land and talent, in an uncompromising commitment to quality, and in a fundamental scarcity that has always been one of Napa Valley's greatest assets. This valley has faced headwinds before. Earthquakes, fires, phylloxera, regulatory shifts, recessions, and each time we found ways to adapt and thrive. The spirit of resilience is written into our landscape and into our DNA. Napa Valley, in every meaningful sense, is a World Heritage Site, even if it hasn't been formally recognized as one. The combination of natural beauty, agricultural heritage, and world-class wines is unmatched. Napa Valley meets the definition of what UNESCO calls a cultural landscape, a place where people and nature have evolved together to create something of enduring value. 20 years ago, I wrote the nominating paper for Napa Valley to be recognized as a World Heritage Site. And I quickly learned that in the US, World Heritage Site nominations require the consent of everyone, 100% of the people inside the nominated site. That was obviously a non-starter. But even without the title, Napa Valley qualifies. As Augustin Huneeus Sr. once told me, and I quote him in one of my books, in the wine world, everyone wants to be like Napa. We're not the first generation in Napa Valley to face adversity. In the mid-1800s, our wine pioneers dealt with isolation, poor roads, limited markets, sanitation issues in wineries and the wines. Yet Charles Krug, H.W. Crabb, Gustav Niebaum, and others persisted, bringing expertise and a vision of quality that laid the foundation for Napa Valley's rise. Then came phylloxera, which devastated our vineyards, and then Prohibition. After repeal in 1933, wineries like BV, Inglenook, Krug, and Martini, the Big Four, led the way back. The founding of the Napa Valley Vintners in 1944 gave vintners a unified voice, and the creation of the Napa Valley Grape Growers in 1975 gave growers a voice of their own. From the establishment of the Ag Preserve in 1968 to the rural-urban limit line that the city of Napa adopted in 1975. From Measure A, the county's slow growth initiative in 1980, to Measure J, the Agricultural Lands Initiative in 1990 that was later extended to 2058, voters have consistently chosen to safeguard agriculture, open space, and the character of this valley. Time and again, we have broken new ground and found common ground. Today we stand at an inflection point. Vineyard projects like Le Colline and Walt Ranch, 2023 and previous, remind us how easily we can become polarized. On one side lies a growing no-growth sentiment. On the other, the economic reality that our agricultural community cannot thrive without room to evolve. Many who oppose growth do so out of genuine concern for the planet. They see climate change as an emergency that demands restraint. Those convictions deserve respect. But climate change also compels us to adapt, to farm differently, build differently, and plan differently. Protecting the land and sustaining the livelihoods of those that depend on it are not opposing goals. They are intertwined. Let me repeat that. Protecting the land and sustaining the livelihoods that depend on it are not opposing goals. They are intertwined. If we focus on balance, on guiding growth rather than stopping it, we can protect what must be protected while allowing for thoughtful, responsible development that supports both our land and our livelihoods. How do we do all that? I propose a framework that protects our most sensitive lands, directs vineyard development to the right places, and helps create the affordable housing that our workers and our community urgently need. My proposal has 4 elements. First, we need to identify the high-value conservation lands with the greatest ecological significance. The environmental community has well-established methods for ranking those resources like plant and animal species and habitat based on rarity, resilience, and degree of threat. The Land Trust, with deep experience in conservation work, should be a key partner in that conversation. Second, we need a parallel framework for viticultural values. Unlike environmental sensitivity, we have no systematic way to assess viticulture vineyard potential. The county has data on where vines shouldn't be planted: saline soils, unstable slopes, serpentine soils, rock outcrops, but nothing to identify where the strongest vineyard sites are. As someone who's spent decades advocating for vineyard development, I've long viewed this as a significant handicap. An opponent may point to a mapped critical habitat or an endangered species, while I had no comparable data to demonstrate the site's viticultural value. Vineyard suitability deserves the same rigor as environmental sensitivity, based on relative value and irreplaceability. Of course, terroir is complex, especially in places where no vineyards exist. But modern science gives us real tools. Integrated viticultural zoning, sometimes called integrated terroir zoning, uses a multi-criteria GIS framework to evaluate wine growing suitability by integrating soils data, terrain derivatives like slope and aspect, climate layers, including temperature, solar radiation, and fog frequency, and other spatially explicit variables that are relevant to viticulture. Models like this are already in use in France, Spain, Italy, Portugal, Chile, South Africa, and Australia. The recent wave of vineyard removals has revealed something important. Not all the acres coming out of production were in the right places to begin with. Some were planted on lands that were always marginal, especially for premium Cabernet. Market forces simply surfaced what agronomy has long made clear. These lessons are an important part of our maturation as a wine-growing region. If we do nothing, if we assume that every site is equally worthy of development, we miss the opportunity to understand in a systematic way which lands have the greatest potential to uphold Napa Valley's reputation for excellence. In practice, the market already makes this judgment. It signals quality through great prices and land prices. But price signals are not a planning tool. What we need is a framework to help decision makers protect the most fragile places while allowing the strongest vineyard sites to flourish. Because ecological and viticultural values are measured on different scales, there will always be a role for discretion and expert judgment. But a transparent, science-based system, rather than adversarial dueling science, will make those judgments better informed, more consistent, and far less contentious. Once these values are defined, the next question is how to put them to work. That's where practical tools come in, mechanisms that apply the framework fairly while still providing flexibility. One such tool is the in-lieu fee system, which is the third element of my proposal. When a proposed vineyard in the right location has some environmental impacts, those impacts should be mitigated on-site whenever possible. But when an on-site mitigation isn't possible, an in-lieu fee can be used to protect or restore higher value ecological lands in the same watershed or elsewhere in Napa County. This ensures that even when vineyard development occurs, the county can achieve a net environmental benefit. Finally, we should establish a transfer of development rights, otherwise known in the planning world as TDR program, to clearly identify sending areas, those are lands that are too ecologically sensitive for vineyard development, and receiving areas in our cities where affordable housing can be built more efficiently. Let me tell you how this works. Landowners in the sending area would be able to sell their development rights to urban builders who would be granted density bonuses to create the affordable housing we need. So they would be given special privileges to either go higher or to build affordable housing more densely in our cities. A TDR system, transfer of development rights system, like this has worked in King County, Washington, home to Seattle, where it has protected farmland and forest land while directing new growth into places that already have the infrastructure to support it. In this way, we could turn the present period of contraction into an opportunity for renewal, transforming a challenging moment into a planning advantage. This is the essence of balance. Smart growth for vineyards, smart growth for people, smart stewardship for the land. The timing couldn't be better. First, the general plan update is now underway. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to embed this vision into policy. The general plan is our roadmap for the next 20 years. It will determine our goals and priorities, where we build, what we conserve, and how we uphold the values that make Napa Valley unique. Last updated in 2008, the new general plan should be in place by the end of 2028. So it's a 2 to 3 year planning cycle. Second, the affordable housing crisis demands local, innovative solutions that also honor our agricultural values. And third, the climate imperative supports both densification and conservation. This is not growth for growth's sake. It's curated stewardship, a way to sustain our agricultural economy while deepening our commitment to the environment and to equity. As we strengthen our framework for land and housing, we also must celebrate and protect the vineyards themselves, the heart of our landscape and the foundation of our identity. American viticultural areas, AVAs, are only the tip of the iceberg in defining what makes Napa Valley unique. Vineyards are the last peel of the onion, the place where the true character of the land reveals itself. A new state law signed by Governor Newsom last month permits wineries to conduct up to 36 tastings per year at off-site vineyards that the winery owns or controls. That's the kind of tourism we should champion. Authentic, land-based, and centered on the people who grow the grapes and make the wine. More than ever, consumers in the trade want to experience that connection firsthand. 2 days ago, the Board of Supervisors signaled their intent to approve these vineyard tastings for a 12-month trial period, but with limits. The initial proposal is 15 people per visit, transported to the vineyard in a maximum of 2 winery vehicles, not the visitor's own vehicles, on a road that's at least 14 feet wide. That's an ag road in the road and street standards. The supervisors will take final action on December 16. Let them know your views. Unlike AVAs, vineyards aren't approved or mapped by the federal government. TTB's only requirement is that the vineyard name can appear on a label if 95% of the grapes in the wine came from the named vineyard. But vineyard names and boundaries can and do change over time, as does ownership, varietal composition, and farming practices. Napa Valley should be the first AVA in the United States to create a vineyard registry, a record of who we are, a living archive of our vineyards and the people who shaped them, including each vineyard's location, history, and defining characteristics. The registry is not a classification system. There is no hierarchy. Instead, it would serve as a factual record and a valuable resource for future generations. Where facts are uncertain or disputed, the registry would simply acknowledge that uncertainty. Any contested matters could be resolved through administrative or judicial processes, or better yet, be evaluated by neutral historical bodies with expertise in authentication. NVG started work on such a registry in 2004, but the effort was cut short. Reviving it now would align perfectly with Napa Valley's values: stewardship, transparency, and authenticity. It also would help protect our vineyard names from usurpation. We've all seen what happens when a place name is turned into a brand and applied to wines from somewhere else. I know it firsthand. I spent 6 years of my life in the legislature and in court to defend the Napa name. A vineyard registry would extend that same protection from the valley level down to the vineyard level. Documenting our vineyards honors our past and secures our future, preserving the meaning of place at the level where it matters most. The framework I've described, balancing conservation, vineyard development, and affordable housing, will only succeed if we actively engage in shaping Napa County's future. We can do that by sharing our local knowledge and expertise, advocating for balance in both the data and the dialogue, and collaborating with the environmental community and other community partners to find common ground. We need to ensure that the agricultural voice is heard early and often. The baseline data report will provide the factual foundation for every major policy decision that the supervisors adopt in the forthcoming general plan. If the data are incomplete or unbalanced, the policies that follow will be too. That's why our participation, your participation, is essential. The agricultural community must ensure that the BDR, the baseline data report, now underway, and the general plan to follow, reflect not only environmental priorities, but also viticultural realities, the land's capacity to produce wines of distinction and sustain the cultural landscape that defines Napa Valley. I urge you to get involved. In fact, there's a BDR workshop later today, virtual. Together, these efforts can lay the groundwork for Napa Valley's next chapter, one that honors our heritage, strengthens stewardship, and sustains both the land and the livelihood it supports. When I step back and think about the issues we've discussed, land use, affordable housing, vineyard stewardship, I'm reminded that these questions are not new. They're simply the latest expression of Napa Valley's enduring pursuit of balance between nature and culture, growth and preservation, innovation and restraint. I explore much of this in my book, Common Ground, Charting the Future of Napa Valley, and even more in my forthcoming book, Cabernet Sauvignon, The Love Affair That Built the Napa Valley, that will be released next spring. With clear vision, creative tools, and the courage to collaborate, we can meet today's challenges and build a stronger, more resilient future, one worthy of this extraordinary place we call home. If there's one constant in Napa Valley, it's our capacity for renewal. Every generation has redefined what stewardship means, from the pioneers who planted the first vineyards, to those who protected this valley in 1968, to the people in this room, you, who are reimagining its future. That's the long view, the promise to care for this place and leave it stronger for the next generation. That is the promise we inherit. Thank you. I I think we do have time for questions, so this is a discussion, and your views are all welcome, so please speak up.
All right. Thanks. How does foreign investment, private equity, I've been growing grapes in Napa for almost 50 years myself. How does that impact your 4 proposals?
Oh, okay. I researched this in my book because I was very interested in what we all call corporatization. And we all read the headlines of the family who's now owned by some larger corporate entity, or maybe by a larger family. So what I tried to find out in the first instance was the facts on the ground. I couldn't do it for wineries, but I could do it for vineyards. And in economics, we look at degree of concentration of an industry. How much of the vineyards are controlled by the top 10 vineyard owners and top 20? That's actually the research I did, and I included leaseholds. So it was both ownership and leaseholds. And the public data was available. So, and this was from my book was in 24, so the data was 23. And so I looked at the top 10. I should have brought the with me, but as I recall, it was the top 10 controlled something like 25% of the vineyards in Napa County. But of those it's in my book, the actual stat, about 40% were owned by families. And when you went to the top 20, it still wasn't that high of a percentage, and it was predominantly family. So if you go to the Napa Valley Vintners Fast Facts, you'll see that 95% of the vineyards are owned by families. The average holding is fairly small, so we're still very much family-based. As for the advantages and disadvantages of families and private equity, family offices, multinational corporations, and the like, it's important not to make, well, you can say it's large versus small. My take on that is that, first of all, the people who come to the Napa Valley with the idea, and this is primarily private equity, of a hold period of 5 years and then flip the winery, usually it's a winery, perhaps with vineyards, that's a different outlook than our families that have been here for generations and pass on the knowledge and the like. By the same token, corporations that have also been here for that long often have more resources to invest in R&D and the like, and actually are making major contributions. You see that at Napa Valley Vit Tech Group and the like, running the trials and innovation. So the good news is that Napa Valley remains at the vineyard level family-based. Most of our wineries are still small wineries. So I think that fabric has not been torn asunder. That's my view. And that family basis is very important for our history. So, I watch it closely, as we all do. Thanks for the question.
I thought I saw.
Richard, I recently had a conversation with someone about entry-level wines, and wanted to ask if you thought that there was a place in Napa for, I don't know how to define this, but perhaps sub-$35 bottle wine, Cabernet Sauvignon in Napa County, or are those entry-level wines coming from other places, and then we hope to see a consumer leap from those places to Napa Valley's bread and butter?
I love the question. Obviously, we need to deal with the oversupply of grapes and bulk wine, and one way to do that, just like when we had wine coolers, soak that up. So a new wine at a new wine style, a new varietal blend at that price point, I think is going to be very important. That doesn't undermine the fact that Napa's real excellence is in making the finest wines in the finest locations. Someone told me yesterday, and I plan to do this. I have a friend visiting on Saturday, and I'm going to do this tasting. Because the real issue to me is typicity. Can you tell if you make a $30 Napa wine, can you tell if it's any different from a wine in Paso Robles at that same price point? Is there something that is uniquely Napa Valley? And the person who was telling me this, they actually told me the 2 wines to try, and I won't name them here, but I'm going to do this tasting blind with a friend. He was adamant that when he did it, that Napa Valley character and shone through in the Napa Valley wine compared to and this was a Paso Robles wine. I think that's important. I care about typicity. Actually, what led me to write the book on Cabernet was I gave a talk last year in Champaign on typicity. Because someone asked me, who has been following Napa Valley wines, said, I'm just going to tell you what he told me. I think Napa Valley wines, I can't tell them apart from other growing regions. A certain category of Napa Valley wines that made me really interested in the issue of typicity. So I deal with that in my new book. I think it's very important that we have, we're a special wine growing region. Our wines have special characteristics. As I said, I think we're making some of our finest, most refined, most expressive, site-driven wines right now. So we have a lot to herald, and I think we need to do that. Thank you for the question. Those are great questions. Anyone else?
Oh, man. Okay. I'm coming. Hi. What are your thoughts on the egg preserve? So do you think that any changes need to be made to that, or is all the development that you're talking about within city limits?
The ag preserve is our heritage. That is our legacy. That's how important it is. So that, number one. That said, and the rural-urban limit line, the principle that agriculture belongs in the agricultural zoning districts and leave the housing and the urban developments in urban centers. That's what the rural-urban limit line mean. That we have that in Napa, the city of Napa, we have it in American Canyon, and it's been upheld. By the same token, when you look at affordable housing, you know the supervisors just adopted a new housing impact fee that's quite large. But what do you do with that money? The problem in Napa Valley is that there are very few spaces in the ag preserve for that kind of housing. Yes, we have 4 housing centers, farm worker housing centers, et cetera, but so where does the housing go? I'm a believer, and I state this in my book, I believe it profoundly, that housing belongs in the urban center. We've got to go higher, we've got to go denser. The one question I have is that there are places on the perimeter of cities that are not appropriate for vineyards that might be appropriate for housing, for affordable housing. The problem is that the ag preserve, this notion that ag is the highest and best use of land, it belongs in ag, housing in the urban centers. If you break that to say one example, this area is better, of the ag preserve, is better for housing, then you might create a fissure that just, you can't make the distinctions anymore. And then we lose what makes us special. So my first priority would be to build the housing in the urban centers and go higher and denser. But I do have a question about some of those areas right on the perimeter of our cities that might be appropriate. And most of that is dealt with through annexation, through LAFCO. And this is happening. It's happening in American Canyon right now, where the cities will expand to incorporate those areas. It's just a long process. We need affordable housing, and we need it now. So how we can achieve that, that's why I built that into my framework. This notion that you save the most fragile areas, people buy those. It's a voluntary system. They buy those development rights, and then they are given. So you have to, that's the Seattle example. That TDR system is made complicated because you've got the county and the city. They have to cooperate to make it work. But we've had a lot of cooperation between, particularly now, I think the relations are good between the city and the county. So it's an idea perhaps whose time has come.
All right, let's give it up
Well,
to
I think
Richard. Thank you.
Thank you.